as well as a demo on lock picking and a lot of other exciting things outside. So please feel free to visit all those places. Well, to kick off the event this morning, we are pleased to have with us our first keynote speaker for today, Mr. Spitzner. I think he needs no introduction to most of you here. He's a founder of the HoneyNet project and is considered to be the leader in the field of HoneyNet and honeypot research. And he has authored many books and articles on security. And without wasting any more time, let's have a warm welcome to Spitzner. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. Thank you very much. This is actually my first time in KL, or actually my first time in Malaysia, so I'm very excited to be here. Just wanted to thank the Hack in the Box team for inviting me. All right, for the next hour or so, I'm going to be talking about something that's relatively new, something that's surprisingly relatively unknown, FastFlex. First, a little bit about myself. As mentioned before, my name is Lance Spitzner. I'm founder of the HoneyNet project, and I'll be talking in a moment about what exactly that is. I've been in information security for about 11 years now. 4 of those years were with Sun Microsystems, where I helped travel around the world securing Sun's customers. And that was a lot of fun because I got a lot of exposure to all the different problems around the world. I worked primarily in Southeast Asia, Singapore, and Philippines, along those lines. I also spent 7 years in the U.S. military, which was surprisingly how I got started in information security. If you're interested later, I can tell you how I went from driving tanks to honeypot research. If we have time, I'll go into that, but there is actually a link. Real quick, about the HoneyNet project, I just want to give you some background on the organization so you know where the information is coming from that I'm about to present. The HoneyNet project is a nonprofit organization, international. What you see up on the map right here is some of the chapters we have around the world. We have some new chapters now, including Mexico, Costa Rica. And what it is primarily volunteers attempting to learn about information threats and then sharing what we learn. And that's in part what I'm doing today. We've been around since about 2000, so we've been around for about 7 or 8 years. And as you can see, we've got a very global perspective. China, Japan, Philippines, from an Asian perspective, Pakistan, a great deal in Europe. So what's really neat is you get a global feel. And one of the big things we quickly learned a long time ago is we're all facing the same problems, same challenges, and same threats. Some of the key points about the organization and some of the key points about the information I'm going to present. First of all, our organization focuses on trends. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today, a trend. We don't really go into specific vulnerabilities, malware types like that. There's already a huge variety of organizations that do a very good job of that. What we try to do is give you actionable information. In other words, we're going to give you information or intelligence about the bad guys. But we want to present that in a way where you can do something about it. We firmly believe that the best way to defend against a threat is to know that threat. So we're going to give you some information, like I am here today, better understand a threat, and you should be able to better defend against it. And then as mentioned earlier, it's primarily volunteers. We're firmly committed to open source. All the tools we release are open source. All the information we release is open source because we believe that the information needs to get out there. Okay, now I'm going to start shifting from our organization to the presentation today. Start really getting into the technical meat of the presentation. As I've mentioned, we've been tracking the trends since 1998. I've been deploying honeypots since 1998. I mentioned earlier, I was going to real quick discuss how I got from the military to honeypots. As a tank officer, I had nothing to do with computers, just driving around in tanks, got to shoot things, a lot of fun stuff. But one of the things they teach in the military is you have to understand your threat. You have to know who you're dealing with, how they operate, so you can defend against it. So in the military, there's organizations that give you that information. As a tank officer, I had to know and understand tank threats. In this case, primarily Soviet. The T-72 tank, how they operated. And I was trained a lot. on how their tanks operated, their command structure, 3 tanks to a platoon, 3 platoons to a company, simply because I had to defend against those threats. When I transferred out of the U.S. military into information security, I once again had a mission to defend against a threat. In this case, it was a cyber threat. Now, back in 1998, 1999, when I transitioned, there was no information on threats. Maybe some technical write-ups on the exploits on how the bad guys broke into computers. But who were the bad guys? Why were they breaking into computers? What did they do after they broke into them? So that's where I started using the idea of honeypots. Now, honeypots were not new back then, but nobody was really deploying them, and nobody was deploying them to capture information. Now, I decided I was going to put something out there to learn about the bad guys. But I'm a horrible coder, and I'm a pretty lazy individual. I like to do things now. I'm not a very good planner. So the one thing I knew was firewalls. I just took some computers, in this case I think it was like Linux Red Hat 5.0, something along those lines, put it on my wife's dining room table, put it behind a firewall, and just wanted to see if anybody would hack into it. This was about 98. Sure enough, within 15 minutes, the computer got broken into, and I started learning about the bad guys. So I knew this was a technique that I could use to learn. And over the years, those ideas have grown. Now, there's lots of different honeypots out there. There's client honeypots, honey tokens, Google honeypots, web application honeypots, server all sorts of stuff. But it's just an idea of gathering information about the bad guys. And that's actually how I went from the military to honeypots. Now, something I've been seeing watching these individuals for the past 10 years, as commonly known, is this shift from, in the old days, hackers were in many ways just individuals out to explore the internet or gain notoriety, make a name for themselves. Around 2001, 2002, we saw a shift where these hackers realized they could start making money. And then within the past couple years, we've seen in a lot of ways it's no longer hackers breaking into computers, but organized crime adopting the hackers. Simply because with organized crime, and I believe Miko is going to be going into this in much greater detail, organized crime is so profitable. Think about it. Extortion, identity theft, fraud has been around for thousands of years. The bad guys have adopted it now simply because they can make so much more money with so less risk. And what's been impressive, especially in the past 18 months, is the level of sophistication of the bad guys. They have simply accelerated their abilities. Amazing stuff. You can't keep up. It's one of the reasons why I look forward to coming to these conferences. So you can learn from so many different experts on just all the new and advanced techniques the bad guys are taking. It's very impressive. Today, I'm going to talk about something that's happening all over the internet, but is not well known. It's a technique called fast flux that cyber criminals are using today to make it much more difficult to track them down, much more difficult to shut them down. In other words, the end result is they have a better, stronger return on investment. That is the one common theme I've seen in the past couple years, is it's all about return on investment, or ROI. A lot of times when I present to senior management, I tell them, you really probably don't need a security expert to present to you about cybercrime. You should have somebody like an economics major presenting to you. Because if you understand the economics of the threat, then you can understand how they operate, what motivates them, how they communicate, things along those lines. So when I'm presenting here on fast flux, keep that in mind. It's all about return on investment. What are the bad guys going to do 6 months from now? Whatever gives them the greatest return on investment. So it's one good way to kind of keep a theme of how they're operating. Okay, what is the goal of fast flux? Well, you're looking at it. Bank of India. As well known, a couple days ago, they were compromised. In fact, it happened right before I got on the plane to fly out to Malaysia here. Now, what's interesting is it's becoming a more common technique. A year ago, 2 years ago, malicious websites were websites the bad guys put up and then would direct traffic to those websites. Or they would be type of a dodgy website, such as online gambling or things along those lines. Now the bad guys are just breaking into sites that are trusted and then inserting their own malicious code. Or, more often, simply code that redirects you to a malicious website. In this case, in the Bank of India, it was simply iframe insertion. And I'm sure you folks will be learning more about iframes if you haven't already. It's just a very, very common technique for inserting code linked from another website. Now, what does this have to do with FastFlux? What you're going to learn is how the bad guys can set up a malicious site that you can't shut down. So what happens in the case of the Bank of India when it's linked to malicious websites that are distributing malicious code? You find the domain names. In fact, I forget what some of the domain names that were used in the linking of the Bank of India site. But what ends up happening is you look up the IP address, you shut down the system. That you go find that IP address and you shut it down. The problem is by the time you shut down that IP address, that website's gone to somewhere else. 5-10 minutes later, you shut down that IP address. The system is going somewhere else. How can the bad guys make these websites move so fast? These malicious websites or sites distributing malicious code or phishing websites. It's come to the point now where we can't shut them down because it's moved, it's migrated to another one. It's doing that by the minute. We can't go ahead and shut the name servers down because the name servers are moving 10, 20, 30 minutes. We can't track down the bad guys because their sites are always hopping around. How do they do this? How do they create websites? How do they create this infrastructure that's constantly shifting? That's what FastFlux is. Now, it's surprising. We've been seeing FastFlux happening in the wild for over a year now, but there's been very little discussion about it. You mainly see discussion about it with the service providers, people providing your internet service. You see it discussed on mail lists such as Nanog. But outside of the service provider realm, you really don't see this being discussed. So one of the goals of the HoneyNet project is to develop awareness about this, because this is how the bad guys are defending against us. They know we're starting to get to the point where we can react rapidly to shut systems and networks down. But this doesn't work anymore because their networks are shifting so fast. So a little bit more. What is FastFlux? How does it work? And what can we do about it? Well, this would be the definition of FastFlux. It's actually the combination of two things. First of all, you may have heard of things such as round-robin DNS or very short time to live, TTL. Basically what it is when the bad guys take a domain name, some type of name, and there's an IP address resolving to that name, that IP address is changing every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever the bad guys set it to. Then they combine this with a reverse proxy or a redirector. I'm going to show you an image of this in a moment. Basically, the end result is we cannot shut down the bad guys' networks, nor can we track down who the bad guys are because they're hidden behind this wall of disposable systems. So what does this look like? Oh, first of all, so why do this? What's the purpose? Well, as always, when the bad guys change their tools, when they change their techniques, ultimately think of how is this making them more money? What is their return on investment? Because that's their end goal. In general, the bad guys don't do anything. The cyber criminals don't do anything unless it's going to make them more money. Well, how does this make more money? It creates a structure, an infrastructure for them that is much simpler. And I'll explain in a moment why it's simpler. It creates disposable front ends. They have lots of disposable assets. Hacked computers. It's just 10,000 systems. They'll just go all through them. And then it protects their back-end servers, the phishing servers, the malicious web servers, the MPAC servers distributing the malicious code. So let's take a moment here and look at this image. This kind of gives us a better idea of what FastFlux is all about. Why do we care? Well, look at the image to your left. On the left, let's see here, we've got to point it out. On the left over here, you have just a normal web browsing site. Your computer, you fire it up, you go to a web server. Well, what happens? It sends an HTTP GET to the web server, and then the web server responds. Boom. That's how normal web activity works.